before we talk about today's lecture, I just wanted to mention that I would send you guys a link for you to upload your homeworks through Microsoft Teams. So please look out for that link. I had promised Yogesh that I would create it, but I have not yet found time to do that. I will do that soon. And anyway, the deadline is Monday. So well before the deadline, I would create that link so that Yogesh won't be inundated with homeworks from 30 odd people, and he would have to sort through all of that along with his regular mail. So please upload your homeworks to the extent possible only through the link that I would send you. Only in the extreme case that there are some technical glitches and you are unable to upload it on the site, then you can email your work to Yogesh, and there will be a deadline set for submission, after which assignment will not be accepted. So please be mindful of this. The deadline, as Yogesh has mentioned in his email, is 9 a.m. on Monday. So I will accordingly set a deadline to the Microsoft Teams link also. So your work will not be accepted after Monday 9 a.m. So be sure to email it before that. Be sure to upload it before that. Okay. And the second homework, I will be sending it to everybody tomorrow. Homework number 2 will be sent tomorrow. So with that announcement, let me share the screen. So can everyone see the blank sheet of paper?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I will lower this a little bit so that we can increase the magnification somewhat. Okay, so let us get started. So all these days we looked at kinematics, and today will be the first lecture on dynamics. So we will talk about rigid body dynamics. In particular, this lecture would be focused on deriving the Newton-Euler equations of motion. Okay, so as a recap of what we discussed in the previous lecture, we talked about basically establishing the kinematic relationships for obtaining the velocity and acceleration of a rigid body. So to do that, we first had to change the tools somewhat, so that we could express the relationships that we were already familiar with in the language of matrices. So we started that out by recognizing that a matrix is a vector transformer. Okay, then we talked about this angular velocity matrix, which transforms a position vector into a velocity vector. So that matrix, we called it as omega cross, and that was a skew symmetric matrix. So this matrix essentially performs the same role as a cross product operation between omega and p. So this was the structure of the matrix. And multiplying the position vector with this matrix gave us the linear velocity of a point which is rotating about the center, with an angular velocity omega. So omega cross, therefore p was equal to p dot in whatever frame of reference you choose to represent this. So then we proceeded to connect this newly discovered angular velocity matrix to the rotation matrix that we were discussing all along, because that's the way we represent the orientation relationships between the inertial frame and the rigid body frame. So in particular, if the angular velocity of the rigid body omega is represented in the inertial frame, the A frame, then omega cross has this particular structure. It is R of B relative to A dot times R of B relative to A inverse. Okay. Then we talked about what the representation of omega cross would be in the B frame, in the body frame itself. Okay. Again, this is for the uninitiated. This might look a little um, confusing, because if we are representing something in the body frame, then would the body not look static in that particular frame? And we have spent already quite a few lectures, quite a few discussions talking about what we mean when we say we are representing the angular velocity in the body frame. Angular velocity of the body itself in the body frame, and that just means that we are resolving the angular velocity vector, which is some vector in space, along the axes which are coincident at this instant with the body's axis. So that's what it means, and that had this particular form, R of B relative to A inverse times R of B relative to A dot. Okay. Then we invested some time in discussing the distinction between P dot represented in the B frame, which is the absolute velocity of this point P, but chosen to be represented in the B frame, and PB dot. PB dot represents the rate of change of the components of P represented in the B frame. And if the point P is fixed to the rigid body, then this is going to be 0. Otherwise, this is going to, the second term is going to read out the relative velocity of that point P with respect to the rigid body in the coordinate frame fixed to the rigid body. P dot in the B on the other hand reads out the absolute velocity of that point P, but represented with its components represented again in the body coordinate system. And finally, we derived the expression for acceleration P double dot as alpha cross plus omega A cross square. So these two matrices operating on the vector P. Now we could choose to represent this in any of the coordinates. Sorry, here I've chosen to represent already in the A coordinate system, but this could be in the A coordinate system or in the B coordinate system. Either way, it is fine. Okay. So we have now gathered around ourselves the tools necessary for launching into discussion of rigid body dynamics. All the kinematic relationships have been established. So we shall start today's class and proceed for the next 3-4 classes at discussing dynamics of a single rigid body. And we shall start that with a discussion on Newton-Euler equations. So are there any questions?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, you just increase the font size, sir. Sometimes we're not able to see it actually.
Font size.
Increase your writing font size.
I will try to lower this somewhat so that the font size becomes bigger. But this, as I said, has the disadvantage that I sometimes try to write outside the field of view of the camera, but I shall try to minimize that as well. Is this better? Is this more readable? Is this font size okay?
Sir,
or do you want it even bigger?
That camera position, okay, sir. Okay, no problem. When you're writing A, B, all these things, sometimes it's not able to see whether it's A or B or like that. Whether it's dot or like that. All these things.
Let me consciously try to write larger then.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Yeah, let me consciously try to write larger. So Rushikesh Shamrao has a question. No. Okay. Sir, so we talked about yes.
In case of rotation matrices, yes, I want to clear my concept that we can interpret the rotation matrices as if means we have to change the rotate a point about origin, and means this can be one interpretation, or
correct.
We are changing the coordinate system and rotating it by some angle theta, and in that new coordinate system we are writing the same point coordinates.
Correct. So in the new coordinate system, if you have a certain representation for a vector, the representation of that vector in the older coordinate system is connected by the rotation matrix that links the two coordinate systems. So the rotation matrix can therefore be viewed as a repository of orientation relationships between the two coordinate frames. It can also, as you said, be viewed as an operator which rotates a particular vector. If there is just a single coordinate frame, then operating, multiplying that rotation matrix with a vector in that one coordinate frame itself amounts to changing the orientation of that vector in 3D by a certain fixed amount. Okay,
Yes.
the
Yes.
amount, the direction, etc., are determined by the entries of the matrix.
Yes.
Okay, so we also
Yes.
talked about similarity transforms. I don't want to get into that. There was a student raised this concern of whether I got the similarity transform expression right or wrong. I don't want to talk about that now. Maybe I will get to that towards the end of the class because I'm not sure if I'll have enough time. It's a simple
Yes.
relationship, but we'll do that later. So we'll
Thank you.
get started with the discussion on Newton-Euler equation. Okay. So before I do anything, let me just put those equations out there. Okay. Although we would spend the rest of the class deriving those equations, and I will tell you why. Let me put those equations out there right away. So first, let me draw this schematic of a rigid body. Okay, and its total mass is m, and it's experiencing a set of forces. So there is one force here, another force there. I'll call this force F1, I'll call that force F2, etc., etc. There could be any number of forces, Fn. Okay, and then I shall locate its center of mass. Okay, I shall call the center of mass G, and that vector, position vector center of mass is Pg. Okay, so as far as translational motion of this rigid body is concerned, you have already studied this in your high school probably, and definitely in your undergrad, that I can replace the forces F1 to Fn by their vector sum acting at that point G, and I can view the entire rigid body as a concentrated single particle, a point mass at that location G. Okay, on the basis of that simplification in the picture, we have this particular equation, sigma F, which is the vector sum of all the forces that are acting on the rigid body. I'll simply put a arrow there to indicate it as a vector, is equal to m Pg double dot, where m is the total mass. Okay, so this is standard Newton's second law applied to a rigid body, except that this entire body can be replaced by a particle, can be viewed as a particle that is concentrated, situated at the center of mass of that rigid body. This is something that you have come across also in your undergrad. I will make a small change to this equation because we are now talking of different coordinate frames. What coordinate frame are we representing the force and the acceleration vectors here? Generally it is the inertial frame, but you could also write the same equation in the body fixed frame by multiplying the right hand side and the left hand side both with the rotation matrix. So it is by default in the inertial frame, but if I were to multiply this right hand side with RAB and do the same on the left hand side, R of B relative to A, okay, then I would be resolving the force components in the body fixed frame FB, and I would also be resolving the acceleration vector in the body frame. So I would get m p represented, p double dot represented in the B coordinate system. So this is a slight twist that you might not have come across, but a relatively straightforward derivation from the previous more familiar expression. The second equation relates to the angular dynamics of the rigid body, and on the left hand side I would have the sum of moments, okay, the torque acting moments of each of these forces, and the moments of each of these forces are defined as Pi cross Fi. So if this first force acts as a position vector P1, the second force acts at a position vector P2, and the nth force acts at a position vector Pn. By definition, the moment of the force P1 is P1 cross F1, the moment of force P2 is P2 cross F2, etc., etc. So I'm assuming that you're already familiar with this. So summed over all the forces that are acting, sigma Pi cross Fi, and that's equal to IB, I'll put it this way, and these are also represented again in the B coordinate system. Okay, so okay, and this is IB times omega B dot, okay, plus omega represented the B coordinate system cross I B omega B. Okay, you might have come across the expression for angular dynamics for planar motion, which is probably far simpler in appearance compared to this, but this is a general equation valid even in 3 dimensions, relating angular velocity and its derivative to the moments acting on. So this sigma pi cross fi can be written as sigma of mi, the vector sum of all the moments of the forces, and that's equal to IB omega dot plus omega cross IB omega. Here you see that I have to be very careful. I at the very outset represented all these vectors omega and the moment, etc., in the body fixed coordinate frame. Why we did that? Why we do that? We will see in a little while. Okay, so this is Newton's second law, and this is what is known as Euler's equation. Newton's equation, Newton's second law. I don't want to say Newton's second law because it's valid for a particle, so I'll write this as Newton's equation, so that the combination becomes a Newton-Euler's equation for a rigid body. Okay. Okay. So, see, as far as dynamics of rigid bodies are concerned, this is about it. You know, it's just applying these equations along with appropriate boundary conditions or initial conditions to rigid bodies and interconnection of the rigid bodies. There is nothing more to it. Just as a starting point for a fluid dynamics person is a Navier-Stokes equation, the starting point for rigid body dynamics are these two equations. There's nothing more to it. Okay. So as engineers, therefore, our starting point can just be this. We can thank the physicists and the mathematicians who have worked hard to derive these two equations, and then we say we take this forward from here and apply it to engineering systems of interest to us and design them well. That's one way in which we could go forward. But there are some aspects to this equation which are a little puzzling, and to be very honest, when I started out teaching this class last year, these were all, my BTech was, I completed that in 2002, so I'd forgotten a lot of things, and I don't know whether I had even learned whether these were taught. Probably they were, but they had disappeared from my memory. It was what struck me was the dramatic difference in the structure of these equations for translational motion, which is Newton's equation, and rotational motion. So let us just focus on the difference in structure. Okay. So for one thing, if you see here, if you view the acceleration as the output from a system's perspective and the force as the input to this rigid body, so I'm providing an input, the force, and the output is the acceleration or the velocity or the displacement or whatever, then the relationship between the two is governed by a linear ordinary differential equation. It's linear. So the system is therefore a linear system because there's a linear superposition and scaling are valid between the acceleration vector and the force vector. Okay. On the other hand, if you look at the expression for angular dynamics, okay, you have omega dot, which is in a sense the angular equivalent of velocity. So here you can write this as velocity of p dot if you wish. Okay, that's p double dot, right? And that's equal to f of p. So the similarity therefore is in the fact that whatever I had as omega dot, whatever I had as p dot, velocity dot, gets replaced by angular velocity dot. To that extent, it's okay. But if you look at the second term, okay, you have omega cross operating on I omega b, I omega, and this results in a set of three nonlinear differential equations. Okay, so while the first equation is linear, okay, is a linear time invariant ODE, This is an ODE, but it is non-linear. Okay, so that's one very striking fact just from the structure. The second, if you notice, is that here I had this mass m, which was a scalar. Here I have this I, symbol I, which I have not defined so far. I is called as an inertia matrix. So what was a scalar gets replaced by a matrix. Okay, so that's one difference. Omega dot has its parallels in VP dot. So to that extent, it's comforting that the angular dynamics looks similar to the linear one. But there is this extra term once again. In addition to adding this nonlinearity, you have a dependence of the moment on omega also here. Unlike in the translational case, where the dependence of the force is only on acceleration, only on the rate of change of linear velocity. Here, the dependence of moment is not just on rate of change of angular velocity, but also on omega. Okay, so it looked very puzzling to me, and for a while I wondered whether there were actually two Newton's laws, one applicable to rigid bodies, one applicable to particles, and other applicable to rigid bodies to describe the rotational motion. Of course, that's not the case. There is just the starting point is Newton's second law, which is applicable for particles, and everything is derived from that. So it's embarrassing in hindsight to even question whether there was one more law that was taught to me, but I slept through that particular lecture and I was not aware of it, which was applicable for rotational motion. So therefore, what struck me about both these equations was when I looked at them first, was my own ignorance of how they came about. Okay, perhaps the first expression, the translational motion, was relatively clear to me. I could clearly see how that was derived, but the second one was a complete mystery. Okay, how on earth was F equal to ma is a linear, again, relationship between acceleration and force, but when written for rotational motion, you get this nonlinear relationship between moment and omega, and then you have this extra term, dependence of moment on omega in addition to omega dot. How do all these things come about? So it was this particular question that piqued my curiosity, and I went about reading up stuff and deriving them and so on, and that was an interesting derivation. So that's why I have devoted this lecture to deriving these two expressions. Okay, for two reasons. As I said, one is that it's amazing that starting from the simple Newton's second law, you could get the Euler's equation. I really don't see how that is possible, just by staring at that equation. The second is, we have introduced all these notions of rotation matrices and angular velocity matrix and so on. And from a pedagogical perspective, the more we use that, the more comfortable we become with it, the more comfortable you guys become with it. And that's the second motivation. So in deriving the Euler's equation and the Newton's equation, your familiarity with some of these notions of angular velocity matrix, etc., will become better. So these are the two reasons that I would devote this lecture to actually deriving these equations. Okay. So how do we go about deriving the first equation, Newton's law for a rigid body, for translational motion of a rigid body? To do that, we start with Newton's law applied to a system of particles. Okay, so the way we picture a rigid body is that we mentally sort of decompose it into any number of infinitesimally small point masses, which have all been glued to one another in a certain form, in a certain shape. Okay, so each single point mass, the tiny elemental mass, should obey Newton's second law, which is applicable for particles. So, and then we view the rigid body as a composition of all these particles. Then we write out the equations of motion for this composite of small point masses. Okay, that's the approach. So that's the idea that we would be pursuing. So let me draw the XYZ coordinate frame. I shall not introduce the A frame and the B frame right away. We shall do that later because it will only serve to confuse stuff. So as I said, we picture the rigid body as composed of any number of small elemental masses, each of for each of which we are clear that Newton's laws are valid. So I shall draw two such masses here, m1, m2. Although in a rigid body, these two masses may be infinitesimally small in magnitude and so situated close to one another. Here I am considering a system of particles which are at some distance from one another, but this distance is not specified. It can also be vanishingly small. So there's no loss of generality in looking at the system of particles. Okay, so m1, m2. So there is a general ith particle mi, and there are n particles, let us say, in this system. Okay, and each particle, let us say, experiences a certain force, external force. I'll call the first particle's force, the force experienced with the first particle, as F1, capital F1. The second one is capital F2, not necessarily in the same direction, etc., etc. The last one is capital Fn. These forces may exist, may not exist. They may be even zero if the particle is not experiencing any external force. And then there are some interaction forces between these particles. So if, for example, you imagine these particles as models of planets in 3D, then you would have gravitational interaction between them. In a rigid body, they are closely situated close to one another. So the interaction will be actually electrostatic repulsion. But anyway, the general expression is some internal force that M1 experiences with M2, and I shall call that F12. Okay, and M2 also experiences an equal and opposite force by Newton's third law, which is F21. Okay, and F12 and F21 are equal and opposite to each other. Okay, similarly, M1 experiences a force with the particle M3, etc., etc. So the general internal force that the particle M1 experiences with respect to a mass Mi is F1I, and Fi1 is the equal and opposite force that Mi experiences due to the presence of that mass M1. So this is therefore the picture. You have a set of external forces and a set of internal forces acting on the system of particles. And the system of particles eventually will be the rigid body, but at this point, it's a general system of particles, not necessarily rigidly welded to each other as it would happen in the case of a rigid body. Okay, but for this system of particles, we can apply Newton's laws because we have been learning this since 10th standard. So for the mass M1, I will have M1 P1 double dot is equal to F1 plus this is the external force plus the sum of all the internal forces that the point mass experiences with the other masses. So I will put sigma F1j, F11, F12, sorry, F12, F13, etc. Not F11, F12, F13, etc., etc. So j goes from 2 to n. 2 to n. Okay. Similarly, for the mass P2, mass M2, I would have M2 P2 double dot is equal to F2. Remember that F1, F2 are all vectors. Okay. I'm not just, maybe I will, I'll just have, I'm saving labor by not drawing these arrows, but they're all vectors. Okay. Then another set of internal forces, F2j, where j goes from, again, maybe 1 to n, and j is not equal to 2. Okay. So in general, I would have a whole set of such relationships, and the last particle will have mn pn double dot is equal to fn plus sigma fnj. J goes from 1 to n. J goes from n to n minus 1. Okay. So this is the, so you will have this index j, taking all possible values except that value n. Okay. So that's how it would be. So this represents the set of Newton's laws, equations that you get by applying Newton's laws to each of these particles. Now I take the sum of all of these on the left hand side. So m1 p1 double dot plus m2 p2 double dot, etc., etc., and I write that as sigma mi pi double dot, where the index I runs from 1 to n, where you have n particles, and that's equal to sigma fi. I goes from 1 to n again. So I have to add on the right hand side all the external forces acting on my system plus summation sigma I goes from 1 to n this internal sum of internal forces Fij, where j goes from 1 to n and j is not equal to I. Okay, so this is how the expression would look. Now let us focus on these internal forces. Among these internal forces, I would have, when I do this summation over I as well as j, I will have terms like F12 and F21, F13 and F31, all of them appearing and adding to one another. But I note that because these are internal forces, F12 is minus of F21, F13 is minus of F31, etc. So more generally, Fij is minus of Fji. Okay, so this is a vector equation, by the way. All the components obey this. So therefore, when I sum them over the indices I and j, this entire sum of internal forces go to 0, and therefore I would have that sigma mi pi double dot is equal to sigma fi alone. Okay, so this term goes to 0, I goes from 1 to n. Okay, then what I do is that I write the left hand side as sigma of mi pi whole double dot. Okay, and the right hand side, of course, will continue to look this way, 1 to n. So now I introduce a new notion, and that's the notion of the center of mass. So if I were to locate a point G here, where I define the coordinate, the position vector of that point G as Pg equal to sigma mi pi divided by sigma mi. Okay, if I define the position vector that way, then I notice that on the left hand side, I can replace sigma mi pi with Pg times sigma mi is the total mass of this system of particles, right? I'll call that as m. Okay, double dot is equal to sigma fi. Okay, and this is the familiar Newton's equation for a system of particles, which is that m times Pg double dot is equal to sigma fi. So notice that we have not really made any assumption about the rigidity of this system of particles in deriving this, and indeed that is true regardless of whether this is rigid or not. This equation would be valid. However, if you don't have a set of discrete particles, as we have considered in this case, discrete point masses, but we have tiny infinitesimal masses dm located at different positions in space, then the definition for the position of the center of mass, so G is of course called the center of mass. The definition for that changes somewhat. The summation here will get replaced by an integral. So Pg will simply be equal to integral dm times p, where p is the position vector of that elemental mass dm, and I have to integrate over the entire volume of that continuum. That continuum need not be a rigid body. It could be as elastic or any other kind of body where the relative positions of these elemental masses change with time. That's okay. Divided by the mass m. So this is the definition of the position vector of the center of mass. And this is something that I don't want to dwell too much upon, because I imagine that you have all come across this in your undergrad education. I'm doing this here just for the sake of completeness and to also define something which would be used later on. So what I can do is the position vector of each mass pi, I can now write it as the position vector of G. I can represent it in terms of its distance or position with respect to the center of mass, plus what's the other term? By definition, this is going to be GPi, right? It's just a vector equation where GPi is pi minus Pg. Okay. Now I define this relative position of a certain elemental mass, or the ith mass in the case of discrete point masses. I define that as rho I. Okay. I will be using this symbol in future, and therefore I'm introducing that here. So the absolute position with respect to the chosen coordinate system here is pi for each of these masses, but with respect to the center of mass, its position is labeled as or defined to be rho I, and that's evident from this equation. So what it turns out that this rho I satisfies an interesting relationship. So for example, if in this expression here I have m times pg is equal to integral p dm, and if I were to write each of these points as pg plus rho dm, then I would have that this is integral pg dm, which is m times pg. Okay, pg is a fixed point in space. It's not dependent on the distribution. So I can remove it out of the integration and simply write it as m times pg plus integral rho dm. Now on the right hand side, I have m times pg, and this leads me to the first interesting observation that integral rho dm over the volume of the particle is volume of the rigid body is equal to 0. And we will be using this going forward. Any questions? Okay, there are no questions. So I'm happy that you have learned your translational dynamics very well in your undergrad. So there are no questions about this derivation. So now let us move to Euler's equation. So to derive angular dynamics, we first go back to the system of particles. I shall draw them again for the sake of clarity. M1, M2, etc., Mn, and we define something called as the angular momentum of this system of particles, and that is given by h. And the angular momentum about any point, you can define angular momentum about any point in space. So if you are defining it about the origin, then it's pi cross of the momentum, mi pi dot. Mi pi dot is the momentum of this particle, mass times its velocity, and the angular momentum is the cross product of the momentum with the position vector if we are defining the angular momentum about the center O of this inertial coordinate system. Okay, but that is not necessary. We can define angular momentum about any point in space. That point need not be fixed. The object need not be rotating about that point. We can define it about any point. And in particular, it is very useful to write down the angular momentum about the center of mass g, and I shall call that as hg comma I, because this is for the ith particle, and that's equal to, in place of pi, in place of taking the cross product between the position vector pi and the momentum, I now take the cross product between the relative position with respect to the center of mass, and that is rho I, and the momentum. The momentum remains the same. It's not with respect to the relative velocity or something. It's the absolute velocity pi. This is the definition of angular momentum about g, the center of mass. Okay. Now, there's an interesting history behind this. I mean, we have written down this equation in one shot, and it might surprise you to know that Newton's laws were introduced by Isaac Newton in his famous work Principia, right? Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. That was sometime in 1680 or 1670 or some such year. Okay. This equation in the present form, in the form that I have written, was written first in 1860. So it took 200 years for people to crystallize the notion of angular momentum. Newton himself intuitively understood the notion of angular momentum because he used this notion to explain Kepler's laws of planetary motion, namely that a planet sweeps equal areas in equal times. So that's Kepler's second law of planetary motion, and that's a direct consequence of conservation of angular momentum for this system of two planets, or a planet going around the sun. But this in its present form, it was first written out only in 1800s, some 200 years after Newton put down his laws of motion. So that's a surprising and interesting fact there for you. Okay, so I have defined the angular momentum about the center of mass, and the expression for that is here. Let me compute the rate of change of angular momentum. Okay, h dot of g I. So I'm giving you a cautionary note here. Whatever we would derive now has a lot of mind-numbing, jaw-breaking algebra. Okay, I'm not proud of it, but it is necessary for us to obtain that beautiful expression, Euler's equation that we saw in the beginning. So I apologize in advance if you get confused with the algebra, but if you carefully go through it after the class, I'm sure you will understand it just fine. There's not too much that we would do that you're not already familiar with. What is h dot g of I? That's equal to, by definition, rho dot I cross mi pi dot plus rho dot of I cross rho of I cross operating on mi pi double dot. Okay, so let us look at the first term here, rho I dot cross of mi pi dot, and I note that I can write pi in terms of the position of the center of mass and the position away from the center of mass. So I can write this as rho I dot cross mi times pi can be written as pg, the position of center of mass, plus rho I by definition, right? So this would therefore be equal to rho I dot cross. I'll get the mi on the left hand side, pg, plus rho I dot cross. This is p dot, right? So this is pg dot and rho I dot. Sorry, this is also pg dot. Am I doing this right? I think so. Yes. So rho I dot. Okay, times mi. Now you see here that I have a cross product of two identical vectors, and this therefore cross product of a with a is 0. So therefore this term here goes to 0. This is a 0 vector. Okay, so I would have therefore that h dot of g comma I, the angular momentum of the ith particle in this system of particles, is equal to mi rho I dot cross p dot g plus rho I cross mi pi double dot. So mi pi double dot is the mass times the acceleration of this particle, which we know is equal to the force Fi, okay, plus the sum of the internal forces that are acting on that ith particle, which is Fij, where j goes from 1 to n and j is not equal to I. Okay, so I've directly written it for the ith particle instead of going step by step manner from the first particle on. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, no questions. Now, let us say we define the angular momentum for all the different particles, the first particle, second particle, etc., etc. Each of them will have a form something like this. Their index will be different. And we then obtain the net rate of change of angular momentum, h dot of gi. Okay, and that will be equal to sigma mi rho I dot cross p dot g. I goes from 1 to n. How to sum up all these terms, plus sigma rho I cross times Fi plus sigma Fij, the sum of internal forces, j going from 1 to n and j not equal to I. Okay. Again, let us examine the first term. The first term is sigma mi rho I dot cross p dot g, and I note that this is, I can interchange the cross product between two vectors by putting a minus sign here. So rho I cross p dot g, rho I dot cross p dot g is minus of p dot g cross rho I. So I can write this as sigma mi times P dot G cross rho I. Okay, and P dot G, you see, is not dependent. There's no index I associated with this matrix P dot G cross, so I can remove it from this expression here, and I can write this simply minus P dot G cross sigma Mi rho I. Okay. Now, for the case of a continuum, we notice that integral rho dm was equal to 0. Similarly, if you have discrete point masses, you would have sigma rho I mi would be equal to 0 for exactly the same reasons. I don't want to do this derivation separately, and we note that therefore this term is therefore equal to 0. Okay, so the first term again disappears. That leaves us with the terms related to the force alone. So h dot of G is equal to, therefore, the terms here. Okay, sigma rho I cross Fi. Okay, this you notice is the moments of all the forces, vector sum of all the moments due to forces Fi plus this double sum. Okay, rho I cross Fij. We have to first sum over j, going from 1 to n, j not equal to I, and then sum over I. Okay, so you have this very complicated term, which ideally should go to 0, you expect, because you don't get all these complicated terms represented in Euler's equation. But how does it go to 0? It's not as obvious as in the previous case, because Fij and Fji were equal and opposite, so we could simply cancel them off. Let us see what this expansion contains. Okay, let us take just one pair of terms in this expansion. Okay, let us consider the point masses m and m1 and m2. So there is this force F12 acting towards m2 and F21 acting towards m1, and the center of mass G is somewhere in this system. What is rho 1? It is the position vector of the point m1 with respect to G. What is rho 2? It is the position vector of the point m2 with respect to G. Okay, so rho I cross Fij would have in it, when you expand it out, two terms among others, one of which looks something like rho 1 cross F12, and the second term will be something like rho 2 cross F21. Okay, and this, therefore, since F12 and F21 are equal and opposite, would be rho 1 cross minus rho 2 cross F12. Okay, and this rho 1 cross minus rho 2 cross, nothing but rho 1 minus rho 2 cross. Sorry, rho 1 minus rho 2 cross F12. Okay, now let us look at this vector. Rho 1, this is rho 2, this is rho 1. So what is the vector rho 1 minus rho 2? The vector rho 1 minus rho 2 is a vector starting from m2 and going to m1. This vector is rho 1 minus rho 2. Okay, and you see that rho 1 minus rho 2, you are taking a cross product of that vector with F12. And if you see here, F12 and F21 are directed along the position vector, rho 1 minus rho 2. And therefore, this vector F12 is aligned with rho 1 minus rho 2. And therefore, this particular cross product goes to 0, because a cross product of two vectors aligned in the same direction is 0. Okay, so in a similar manner, I can pairwise eliminate all of the terms here, with the consequence that this entire sum here is also, though intimidating to look at, is actually 0. Okay, when I sum over all the different indices, I get 0 also in the for this particular term. Okay, so this kind of a force, where the force is not only equal and opposite, but acts along the radius vector connecting these two masses, this kind of a force is called as a central force. You must have come across this term when you are studying gravity or electrostatic Coulomb's attraction and so on between 2 point charges. All these forces act along the direction connecting these two point charges or point masses or whatever, and such forces are called central forces. And in case of rigid bodies, as I said, any force of repulsion that you would have between two masses would be due to electrostatic repulsion between them, and that's again a central force. Okay, there will be a very weak gravity force which we can ignore, but that too is a central force. So F12 is therefore going to be a central force. As a consequence, this entire thing is going to go to 0. Any questions about this? Ajinkya has a question.
Yes, sir. We can do this 0 in the first step only, no? We are considering Fi plus summation of Fij.
Yes.
Here only we can do this 0 as we did in first case. Fij is 0. Summation.
Oh, sorry. No, you cannot. You cannot. Because you see, this is rho I cross Fij. This Fij here, I'm not summing over I. I'm summing only over J here. Okay. So yes, there is no F21. For example, if I was 1, I will not have F21 here. I'll have only F12, F13, F14, so on and so forth.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So what we have therefore as the first small milestone in our journey towards obtaining Euler's equation is this relationship that H dot of G is equal to sigma rho I cross Fi, which is the sum of the moments, which is sigma Mi. Let me call it that way. Okay. And H dot of G by definition is the net angular momentum in that system of particles, which is H dot of G comma I, where I goes from 1 to n again. Okay. And what is the definition for angular momentum? H, that's equal to sigma rho I cross Mi P dot I. Now, if I have a rigid body, which we can view as a whole set of tiny point masses dm distributed in space, then this summation here will get replaced by an integral, and I would have for a continuum, not necessarily a rigid continuum, but a continuum object, I would have this to be equal to dm rho cross P dot dm integrated over the entire volume of the particle, volume of that object, and that's the angular momentum H about the point G. Okay. About any other point, I can simply replace rho with an appropriate vector if I have to define the angular momentum about a different point. Okay. So this expression is all that we can do if we are given just a continuum of elemental masses dm, okay, which together comprises that overall mass m. But we can make this expression a lot more simple in appearance for the case of a rigid body, and we shall do that next. Okay. The angular momentum assumes a more simple form for a rigid body. So that's the next analysis that we are going to undertake. What is H about G? That's integral rho cross P dot dm. And I can write P dot, the velocity of that elemental mass located at the point P, to be again as P dot of G, the velocity of the center of mass, plus the relative velocity, which is the rate of change of the relative position vector, rho dot. Okay. So therefore, I would have H of G to be equal to integral rho cross P dot G plus rho dot dm. Okay. Which I can expand as rho cross P dot G dm plus integral rho cross rho dot dm. Okay. Now, again, there are two terms here. I can write integral rho cross P dot G dm as minus of integral P dot G cross rho dm. A cross B is minus B cross A. That's what I'm using here. And P dot G, PG is a particular point, okay, in space, and I can therefore remove it out of the integration. And I can write this as simply P dot G cross integral rho dm minus of this. And what is integral rho dm? That's by definition equal to 0. Okay, so the first term here goes to 0. That leaves us with Hg, the angular momentum, to be equal to integral rho cross rho dot dm. Now, if you have a rigid body, here is where the rigid body model comes in. This is the first place that we are employing the rigidity of this system of point masses. If you have a rigid body, then rho dot represents the relative velocity of this point, on the rigid body with respect to its center of mass. And because it's a rigid body, I can write this as omega cross rho. This is the first place where the rigidity of that body is being brought into the picture in deriving the relationship between angular momentum and angular velocity. Okay, so I can write this, and with this substitution, I would have this to be equal to rho cross omega cross rho dm, which is equal to minus of integral rho cross omega cross rho is minus of rho cross omega. So this is rho cross again omega dm. Okay, so this is hg, and I can write, since omega is a single vector that is fixed to the rigid body, that is defined for the entire rigid body, there's no spatial variation in omega. I can remove it out of the integral. Okay, but on this side, in keeping with the way matrices and vectors multiply one another, and I can write this as integral rho cross, which is rho cross square dm, this term minus of this term times omega. Okay, and this term integral rho cross square dm has a special symbol, and that's the I, the inertia matrix. I don't know if you are taught this in this particular language in your undergrad, but this is what the inertia matrix is. So the angular momentum for a rigid body can be written as a certain inertia matrix I, which is dependent on the distribution of that mass in space times the angular velocity. Okay, you cannot do it for a general amorphous body, which can change its shape and so on, but for a rigid body, you can do this. Okay, so now this is the third milestone, and we are just one step away from obtaining the Euler's equation of motion. So let us, any questions about this, by the way? Okay, so I see that the algebra is fairly clear. So let us proceed with the expression for the rate of change of angular momentum. And I know that it's going to be equal to h dot, and from whatever I derived in the previous page, it's going to be d by dt of I times omega. That's going to be equal to the sum of the moments of these forces, pi rho I cross fi. I is equal to 1 to n. Okay, that's going to be the expression. Now, in what coordinate frame have we written this equation? Of course, in the a coordinate frame. That's the inertial coordinate frame, right? So I shall put this superscript a everywhere. Okay, to represent the coordinate frame in which we have written this equation. Now, I am not very happy with writing this equation in the a coordinate frame for one important reason, and that has to do with how what happens to the inertia matrix I in the a coordinate frame. What is the expression for I in the a coordinate frame? By definition, IA is equal to minus integral the rho represented in the a coordinate frame cross. Okay, so this is position matrix times dm. Now, if I imagine a rigid body such as a top or whatever else, some potato which is rotating with respect to the a frame, xa, ya, za, you notice that this rho a, which is the position of some point of some elemental mass dm at a particular point in time, is also going to be a function of time, because if this is rotating, if this mass is rotating, rho a is constantly changing with time as a consequence of the rotation of this mass dm about a certain axis. So this, therefore, IA in general will be a function of time. Okay, and that is a slightly disconcerting fact. Okay, I don't want this dependence of the inertia matrix on time. So mass doesn't depend on time, so I would like this inertia matrix to also not depend on time. And for that to happen, I have to go to the body fixed frame. Okay, if I sit on the body, if I define this xb, yb, zb coordinate system, which is fixed to the body, then in that frame, this rho represented in the b coordinate system is going to remain unchanged as function of time. It's going to remain constant. Okay, so instead of writing this equation in the a coordinate system, I would want to write this equation in the b coordinate system so that I will not be a function of time in that coordinate system. That's the motivation for me to write the equation in the b coordinate system. Any questions about this? Okay, so we have to now, this is the last step before we summit our mountain. So we have to represent all these variables here in a rigorous manner in the b coordinate frame. Okay, so let us first start with this guy here, IA. IA is integral rho a cross square, sorry, not just rho a cross square dm. And I know that rho a and rho b, which are the representations of the same vector rho in the a and b coordinate system, are related by the rotation matrix R of b relative to a, right? So I would have therefore that rho a cross, which is the position vector, position matrix, okay, would be related to rho b cross, okay, by means of that similarity transformation. We talked about that in the previous lecture. I would have this rho b cross, sorry, I would have this to be R of b relative to a times rho b cross R of b relative to a inverse. Okay, that's going to be rho a cross. So therefore, I would have that IA is equal to integral rho a cross square, which I can write as rho a cross times rho a cross dm minus, there's a minus sign here. And that, if I substitute this expression here, I get rho a cross times rho a cross to be equal to R of b relative to a times rho b cross times R of b relative to a inverse times another exactly identical term R of b relative to a times rho b cross times R of b relative to a inverse. Okay, and now you notice that in this big and ugly expansion, some very nice simplification is possible. I can, if you see in the middle, I have RAB inverse times RAB, so that's an identity matrix. So I would have this to be equal to R of b relative to a times rho b cross times rho b cross, which is rho b cross square, times R of b relative to a inverse. Okay, therefore I would have that I of a is going to be equal to R of b relative to a times I of b times R of b relative to a inverse. Similarly, the angular velocity in the A frame is related to the angular velocity in the B frame by means of this equation. So therefore, IA omega A, which is the angular momentum represented in the A frame, is related to the angular momentum represented in the B frame by multiplying these two things, which is going to be R of b relative to a IB, R of b relative to a inverse times R of b relative to a times omega b. Again, I'll have these two giving me an identity matrix, and therefore I would have this to be equal to R of b relative to a times IB. I know this is not I subscript b, I'm sorry, this is IB that way. Moment of inertia represented in the B coordinate system, I superscript B. Okay, I'm very sorry about the subscript. Omega represented in the B coordinate system. So this is going to be the expression for angular momentum IA omega A in terms of IB and omega B. Any questions about this? Again, straightforward algebra. So if you are not able to follow some step, just go back and follow the equal to sign. You're going to get this. Okay. So the next step is to note that H dot in the A frame is therefore equal to R of B relative to A times IB times omega B whole dot, because this right hand side is nothing but IA omega A. IA omega A dot. Okay. So and this in turn is going to be equal to R dot of B relative to A times IB omega in the B frame plus what is IB dot? IB dot is equal to integral rho B cross dm whole dot. But you see that rho B is the position of this elemental mass B in the coordinate frame fixed to the rigid body, right? So since this mass dm is also a part of the rigid body, that position vector does not change with time, and therefore IB dot will be equal to 0. Okay, so I don't have to write that term out. I'll just have to differentiate the angular velocity. I'll just have this to be R of B relative to A, IB omega dot B, and this is equal to H dot A. Okay, and the last step is to represent H dot A in terms of H dot B. To do that, I multiply this with R of A relative to B, and I get H dot represented in the A coordinate system multiplied by R of A relative to B is equal to R of A relative to B times R of this entire thing on the right hand side. R of B relative to A, IB omega B plus R of B relative to A, IB omega dot B. Okay, so R of A relative to B times R of B relative to A is identity matrix. One is the inverse of the other. So I would be left with simply IB here. Sorry. This is R dot. I'm very sorry. There is a mistake here. This is an R dot here. Mistake there. So this is not going to be an identity matrix. So this is R of A relative to B, R dot of B relative to A, IB omega B plus here we would have R of A relative to B times R of B relative to A, IB omega dot B. Okay, this term here is identity matrix because R of B with respect to A times R of A with respect to B times R of B with respect to A is 1. This, on the other hand, is what is this? R of B A relative to B times R dot of B relative to A. This is, I can rewrite this for it to look a little bit more familiar as R inverse of B relative to A times R dot of B relative to A. You can write it that way. Just replace R of A with respect to B by this particular expression. And if you flip through your notes and go to the previous lecture, you will notice that this is nothing but the angular velocity matrix omega cross represented in the P coordinate system. R inverse times R dot is omega B cross. Okay, so with that, I get on the left hand side, I am resolving the components of H dot in the B coordinate system. So I would get H dot represented in the B coordinate system, the rate of change of angular momentum, and that's going to be equal to omega B cross IB omega B plus this is an identity matrix, so I would get IB times omega B dot. And we have reached our destination. So this is the famous Euler's equation. Okay, any questions? Somebody seems to have a question, but Malleshwar Rao, yes.
Sir, could you please explain why inertia is a function of time in A frame? Once more, please.
Yes. So if you, what is the definition of IA? I have shown that here. This is the definition of IA, right? So let us say this point here is the center of mass. We ignore the translation of center of mass. We only look at rotation. If this is the center of mass, okay, and this object, this potato, is rotating in 3D, okay, then if I pick any elemental mass dm, okay, then this mass is going to be rotating about that axis of rotation, right? So that position vector of that mass dm with respect to the center of mass, which is by definition rho, is going to be changing with time, since this mass dm is rotating. And therefore this rho a therefore is a function of time, and as a consequence I will be a function of time. That's it. Is that clear?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions? Rushikesh, yes.
Sir, means in hypothetical case, if we are willing to write it in A frame only, a moment of inertia equation. So in that case, that is the rate change will be related to the angular velocity only, no?
Well, not necessarily. See, if I were to write it with the A frame, I will have d by dt of ia omega ia equal to h dot, okay, which is equal to the moment sum of the forces. I will have to know, I'll have I dot of a times omega a plus I of a times omega dot of a, omega dot represented in the a coordinate system. So I will have this rate of change of inertia matrix, okay. That will have to once again have to obtain it. But if I have to derive that properly, I will have to once again go back to a fixed coordinate system where the inertia matrix is not going to change with time. Okay. Okay. But you can, I mean, you can just do it that way also. Okay. But this looks a lot more compact and is a lot more useful, as we will see going forward. Okay. So this was one reason at the outset, if you remember, I built motivation for using a body fixed frame, and this is one very important reason why we go with a body fixed frame. In addition to some of the loads being fixed in magnitude or direction in the body fixed frame for spacecraft and aircraft and such other things, the equation also assumes a very simple form, a relatively simple form, let me put it that way, in the body fixed frame. Okay. So before, any other question? Yeah, before we conclude the class, I wanted to extend this analysis this time not for angular momentum defined about the center of mass, but angular momentum defined about a fixed point on the rigid body. So if the rigid body is rotating about a certain fixed point, which is not necessarily its center of mass, so let that point O be the fixed point. Okay, it's rotating about that point. So this is XA, YA, ZA. Then too, we can write an equation very similar to this, not otherwise. Okay, this equation is valid. This of course is about the center of mass, right? And this equation is, sorry, I have not completed this equation, is going to be equal to the sum of the forces, sum of the moments of the forces, rho cross F represented in the B frame. Okay, so this is therefore equal to sigma M represented in the B frame, the sum of the moments of forces, sum of torques represented in the B frame. I didn't complete that equation, so I'm sorry. We had that term, but in trying to simplify H dot here, I forgot about that. This is rho A cross F A I equal to 1 to N. Now that has to be carried over and written again here. I had not done that, so I have done it. So this completes the equation. This is the real relationship between the moments due to forces applied and the way the angular velocity changes as a function of time in the body fixed frame. Now suppose we were not taking the moments about moment of momentum, which is the angular momentum about the center of mass, and we were to take the moment about this origin, about this point O, about which the rigid body is rotating, then too, see what will the expression then be for the angular momentum? HO will be equal to, instead of this being rho cross, it will be simply be P cross, P dot dm. This was earlier rho cross. If you are taking the angular momentum about the center of mass. But now I'm taking it about the origin about which it's rotating, and my position vector p is also with defined with respect to the same origin. So I'll have p cross p dot dm. And again, I notice that if it's rotating about this point, I can write p dot again as omega cross p, where omega is its angular velocity. And therefore, even for this case, I would have angular momentum HO to be equal to some matrix, inertia matrix I times omega. Okay, so this is about that point O. The earlier inertia matrix IB was about the point G. I have dropped off G because it was sort of reflexively assumed that you're talking about the center of mass all the time, but I can qualify that what we mean by IB here by simply putting that subscript G there. Here, this is IO. Okay, and once again, I can show that in a very similar manner, similar Euler's equations can be written even for torque that is acting about that point O. Okay, so we can write a very similar equation as Euler's equation if the point O is fixed. Okay, and I shall not do that. Maybe that will be part of your homework because I have given you the first step here. From this, you can proceed further and derive the remaining. Okay, so this will be this kind of an equation that you would get about that point O will be generalization of the equations that you might have come across in your undergrad relating the torque applied to the rate of change of angular velocity. That might have been done for the case of rotation in a plane, rotation only about the z-axis. This is a more general case of 3D rotations. Okay, this derivation of the relationship between h dot and the moment would be part of the homework. Okay, so this is where I would wish to stop, since we have a few more minutes. It's 11:23 now, and if there are no further questions, I just wanted to come back to this notion of angular momentum and dwell upon the origins of this definition. Okay, how or whoever thought of taking the cross product between the position vector and momentum and defining it as an angular momentum? How can we intuitively approach this particular definition? Since we have time, I just want to dwell upon that a little bit. This would be of interest to physicists, not so much to engineers perhaps, but it's still interesting. See, if you look at the expression for angular momentum, h for any particular mass, let us say h1, then it's given by p1 cross m1 p1 dot, right? So what is the basis for someone to take a cross product of momentum with this particular position vector? And then, of course, once you define this, then you can follow the algebra and get all these other wonderful results, arrive at the Euler's equation. But what is the basis for inventing even a symbol of this kind, the angular momentum vector? What is the basis for that? So there's a nice approach through which you can understand how this might come about naturally, and this is in Feynman's lectures on physics. Okay, and that has to do with equating the work done when a particular mass m1 rotates about a certain point, rotates about the origin, let us say. So let us say this point m1 is here, and it's acted upon by some forces fx. Maybe I'll put fx this way and fy that way. Okay. Now, what is the work done when this mass moves about by a certain angle delta theta? What is the work done? The work done would be fx delta x plus fy delta y by definition. That is delta w, that incremental work done when this mass m moves about the center by an angle delta theta. And I know that delta x, I can write it as fx is equal to, what is delta x? Since this is rotating about this origin, this tiny line segment, the direction in which the mass moved, is perpendicular to the radius vector. So therefore, this angle here, if this angle is theta, that angle is 90 minus theta, you can show that delta x through simple trigonometry is nothing but y delta theta. Okay, minus y delta theta, because it is displacing in the negative x direction while going from here to here. Okay, plus Fy times delta y, that's the net work done, right? Times what is delta y? That's a displacement in the vertical direction, right? That is positive, and you can show that delta y for rotation about this point O is equal to x delta theta. Okay, so the net work done is therefore minus Fx times y plus Fy times x times delta theta. Okay, so if I were to therefore represent the net work done not in terms of linear displacements delta x and delta y, but in terms of an angular displacement delta theta, then automatically this Fx times y plus Fy times x enters into the equation. And this, if you see, is nothing but the cross product of this position vector, x comma y, xy transpose, you take the cross product of that with the force vector, you get this particular term here. Okay, of course, the z component of that is going to be this term, but as long as we are talking of motion in plane and not looking at motion in 3D, this is good enough. Okay, so this is how you see that r cross f naturally enters into the equation, enters into our analysis when you try to express the work done when you apply forces Fx and Fy on a particle rotating about the center O in terms of delta theta instead of in terms of delta x and delta y. Now, how does the definition of angular momentum enter into the equation? How can we arrive at this expression for angular momentum? Well, I can write Fx as mx double dot. Okay, and so I would have mx double dot times y, and Fy as my double dot times x. This is going to be this term here. And by doing a lot of algebra, I can show that this term here is nothing but m times d by dt of x times dy by dt minus y times dx by dt. Okay, so this, I hope I have got the signs right. Otherwise, it's going to be minus of this expression. But we can do that algebra and show that this is m times minus x double dot y plus y double dot x. You can show that entire thing, if you simplify this, you're going to get the same thing. You're going to have some cancellations and you're going to get that. Okay, and this here is nothing but d by dt of mx dy by dt minus my dx by dt, and m dy by dt is the angular momentum, the linear momentum along the y-axis. M dx by dt is the linear momentum along the x-axis. So you can therefore show that this term within the bracket is nothing but, again, the position vector x, y transpose taken as a cross product with the velocity vector. Okay, dx by dt and dy by dt. Of course, I have
writing below the.
Sorry. Yeah, I have not written this in terms of the position matrix here, but you get the point. I'm just doing a back of the envelope kind of a demonstration to explain the origins of this particular definition. Otherwise, it looks mysterious. Why would anyone think of taking the cross product of momentum with position vector? Why would anybody even think of this clever thing? Of course, it's not always possible to explain the workings of a genius such as Isaac Newton or anybody else, but sometimes it turns out that there are very simple alternate routes through which we can arrive at similar definitions because they make sense to us. For example, if you look at the work done and represent it in terms of delta theta instead of delta x and delta y, naturally r cross f, which is the definition of the moment of a force, enters into picture. Similarly, if you go a little bit further and represent f in write in terms of accelerations, and then simplify that, then that can be written as the rate of change of angular momentum r cross p. Okay, so angular momentum definition also therefore naturally emerges through this analysis. It's just out of curiosity to explain how one might have come up with a definition for angular momentum in the manner that we have shown here. That's it. Okay, so we are done. We'll meet again next Tuesday. Thank you.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, please share this handwritten sheets so we can get, sir.
Okay, sure. All right, I'll do that. I'll scan it and send it to you. But you will, it's already visible, right? I mean, as I write, you are able to see it. Is it not?
We are, while the class, we are not able to note down all these things now, so that's why we can revise immediately.
Okay. All right, I'll do that.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, Jain sir, attendance list.
Thank you for the reminder. I'll do that. So I don't see any further questions from students. So I shall therefore sign off now. Thanks a lot.